The Minnesota Wild trade offer for Marco Rossi has leaked, and things are getting crazier by the day as they go on. And it puts the Minnesota Wild in a very good and interesting spot going on in free agency with names like Brock Boeser surrounding the Minnesota Wild. And we're also going to be talking about at the end of this video here the new AHL coach, Craig Cronin, for the Minnesota Wild, and letting you know how important this coaching decision is. We're going to be breaking it all down here on this video, ladies and gentlemen. Before we do get into it, be sure to hit the sub button if you haven't already. We have so much Minnesota Wild news coming. You won't want to miss it. We're going to be having videos all throughout the draft, free agency. You're not going to want to miss it. We're going to have it all right here for you. But let's jump straight into this. We have no time to waste. We're going to jump into this quote from Frank Cervalli on Sportsnet 650 going over the trade that Marco Rossi was rumored in with the Vancouver Canucks. He says the rumor the Canucks offered is the 15th pick plus for Marco Rossi is true. It's going to take more. We finally have some news regarding Marco Rossi on what the price tag is going to be. We saw some fake ones going with the Philadelphia Flyers a couple weeks ago. Those were ones that, we weren't really too excited with, but the 15th overall pick plus, and they declined it. This is a very good sign for the Minnesota Wild. I'll tell you why, because when we look at the Minnesota Wild, we look at Bill Guerin. There was a lot of uncertainty surrounding if he would make the correct decision, the one that is best for the franchise in Marco Rossi. And there was a lot of, I was concerned. I won't be afraid to say that. I was very concerned that we would give up Marco Rossi for, frankly nothing and really just waste away a talent, and he would come to bite us in the ass again in a couple years' time. Just like, the NHL wagon works when you let go of a player. Alex Tuck, for one example. But when you come down to Marco Rossi here now, and a couple days ago, Bill Guerin coming out and saying that, we're not in a desperate need to trade Marco Rossi. I don't know where this is all coming from. We will keep him if need be, and if we're not getting the right offer, whatever's best for the organization, we're going to do it. And now I'm starting to hop on board with Bill Guerin here as that starts to come out. And now I want to pull up as well around that 15th overall pick, because there could be some moves that, kind of work around whether the Vancouver Canucks attempt to at least sweeten that deal a bit. And, there's another report that we're going to get into here, which is another kind of addition to this trade. But with that 15th overall pick, you see Lyndon Lakovich there at 15 to the Canucks. Surrounding that, I think the Minnesota Wild would really need to come out here and look and say, hey, is there anybody right now that would help us? And that's one thing that Bill Guerin has said very importantly over the past few days, and especially when he came out and said Marco Rossi trade is not something very, that they're going to need to try and make. If it works, it works. If it don't, it don't. They said they're looking to get better now. And I don't think any of these players on this right here in specific would make this team better right now, immediately coming into next season. A lot of these players will be heading over to the NCAA. You're going to have to spend a few years there. And I think that's a big reason as to why the Minnesota Wild at least rejected this trade. And, they want to make sure they're getting better. And, I feel like it's a very tough thing to kind of justify having any of these players actually making you better over Marco Rossi. Now, with $15 million in cap space, Marco Rossi is going to be getting around 7 of that, around half. And we've, of course, seen, as you saw there in the intro video as well, Brock Boeser, an option that would, kind of sweeten the deal a bit, I would say, in the signing that if they do get him, it would give another Vancouver Canuck player an opportunity to come play with Minnesota, give him a familiar face. But the fact that, looking at Marco Rossi, the way we saw him play so good. And, we saw everything except for the playoffs because he wasn't given the chance. These numbers here are numbers that will help you win a Stanley Cup right now. Over anybody. I shouldn't say anybody, but over many, many, many of the names that have been kind of thrown out there, this is one that really helps out right now, much more than a lot of these players. But I wanted to jump into as well what Canucks Daily had to say on their side of things. During Monday's edition of the Canucks Central, Satyar Shah shared that the Minnesota Wild wanted one of the top prospects along with their 2025 first-round pick in exchange for Marco Rossi. So you go out and throw in a few names here that would be a top prospect for the Vancouver Canucks. That would, in my mind at least, be Jonathan Lekkerimäki, Thomas Wallander, or Aatu Raty. Those are the three that really, in my mind, immediately would be a benefit for the Minnesota Wild at this point in time. Will the Canucks be willing to trade any of them? I'm not sure, but I think they would certainly be a big help for this Minnesota Wild team in making this team better. Now, once again, when we kind of come back to those picks as well that were available in that instance of what the Wild were trying to do, these kind of picks around 15, the Wild may not even make that pick. They could go out, trade that pick for someone who's trying to move up into the draft, trying to move down, make that team better in that way. And if they think they can do it, they would almost have to have a deal in place already. things could look pretty good for this Minnesota Wild team. So let me know what you think about that there in the comments below, because this team needs some additions. There's no doubt about that. This team is right now still pretty solid, but Marco Rossi right there, you're going to have Tadila Yurov coming in playing center. There's a lot of uncertainty surrounding what the center thing, the center depth, and the whole thing's going on, all the things going on with this are going to look like. So let me know what you think in the comments below there, because, of course, when we look at Marco Rossi's contract, compared to another name that we're going to talk into just here now, things are looking very interesting, because we know that Marco Rossi is going to be, as I mentioned, getting around $7 million, 7.3, 7.4 for 7 years. Could be a bridge deal. I don't feel too confident about that, but looking at a long-term deal, and you're looking at a guy like Brock Boeser, who we've spoken about in a previous video, coming out here and going towards the number of $8.4 million. If you keep Marco Rossi, you get Brock Boeser, and you don't make a trade, you're using up every single bit of this cap space here for this Minnesota Wild team pretty much going into next season and not being able to make any more moves. And I think that's where Bill Guerin's head is at right now. I think that's where they're currently standing, currently trying to make things work and trying to, bring out the positive in all of this while not making sure to waste every single bit of cap space they're getting from Zach Parise and Ryan Suter's contract getting lowered significantly by around $13 million. So there is a lot of question marks surrounding what Brock Boeser would be kind of going here along with Marco Rossi. And I want to know as well, I kind of spoke about this in the last video, but do you think that could be affected by a Vancouver Canucks trade with that 15th overall pick, a guy like maybe Thomas Wallander, who I think is very unlikely to be traded, but if the Vancouver Canucks are desperate for Marco Rossi, that would have to be the price. I think that Frank Cervelli really confirmed that, and I think that could be a very interesting option for a guy like Brock Boeser, who could be coming to a Minnesota Wild team. It is his home, but a familiar face could look a very big help here for him on that side. So let me know what you think there, because at this point, it really seems like everything is done except for the actual signing itself. We saw Nick Caprios come out and say this a couple days ago. It was in yesterday's video as well, I believe. Brock Boeser, we assume, is coming to real close to terms with the Minnesota Wild. And on July 1st, Canada Day, is when free agency opens. We're going to get a good idea if that is true then, depending on how quick this signing comes to fruition, if true at all. Because, Nick Caprios has a pretty up and down resume, but I need to see it when I believe it from Michael Russo, from Joe Smith, from any of these Wild reporters. That's when I'm fully on board with that. But we have one more little bit of news here before we finish this video off, and happened a few days ago. Had not made a video on it though, but the Iowa Wild have signed Greg Cronin as their new head coach, and this is a very, very big coaching decision for them. It was one that we know was going to have a big change. I think this is probably one of the best options they could have made. Now, I'm seeing a lot of people a bit wary about Greg Cronin due to what he's done in Anaheim. The team that had a bit of momentum kind of really killed that off, but it is a very different looking team from the Anaheim Ducks to the Iowa Wild. And although there's still very similarities, like a lot of young players, a lot of teams that are going to be trying to develop some of these players, the Iowa Wild are one of those, but Greg Cronin is a very defensive-minded coach, and he's one that's kind of, lay back, go on the counterattack. And I think that's why we saw so much, I don't want to say failure, but causing Trevor Zegras, who just recently was traded, to kind of fall into that unknown category, is because that he wasn't letting him shine. He had to play a game that he wasn't really used to, and I think a lot of people may find that a bit, cautious for the Iowa Wild, but he's been a very good coach to develop younger players by not just altering their game to a right decision, but to really just kind of show these players where they're going. And having an NHL coaching experience, I think, is a huge thing as well, and I wanted to pull this up. His history over the past few years, the Colorado Eagles, he was the head coach down there for the Colorado Avalanche, their farm team there. Not a great playoff resume. Got to the playoffs quite a few years, though, but when you look at the Ducks, not great there either, really, but a better year this year. But I think it's going to be a very good one. I think a lot of people are kind of underestimating Greg Cronin's abilities. I think that he is more of an AHL kind of coach rather than NHL, and if he does get the NHL opportunity again, I think he will be in a very good position there, but he seems to me, at least, and kind of the way that we've seen him be able to coach over the past few seasons throughout the NHL and the AHL, that his AHL game and development style is much more important and better than the NHL game. And I feel like Bill Guerin made that decision for that reason. Trying to get players to win down the AHL, that will cause them to win in the NHL. So let me know what you think about all this news here today. We had a lot of news, but I know it's a bit of a late video. We got a lot more stuff coming, though. We've been planning quite a bit in the draft now coming up. The Minnesota Wild could find themselves in the first round, but that's something we're going to have to wait, and we're going to have it here on the channel if it happens, so be sure to hit that sub button. That's all I got in this video. If you did enjoy, give it a like, hit the sub button as well. I'm signing out, though. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a great day. See you later.